Hello, this is Vinny. I'm going to be using Vinny today to show how the punitive war on drugs policy is very ineffective in dealing with its main goals, taking drugs off the street and combating the drug rates. But first, before we get into that, I'm going to give a brief overview of the war on drugs topic so you actually know what we're talking about. And I'm going to show both sides so you can get a bigger view on the whole topic and you can get the complete and full picture. To even talk about this policy, the first thing that should be mentioned is Richard Nixon. He was a president when this policy was implemented. He coined the term war on drugs. This method really wasn't different from what they had used before. It's a punitive method. So by punitive method, it meant it criminalized drugs, making it a criminal offense to use drugs, and you could be put in jail for it. So for example, someone who had small amounts of marijuana in 1974 in New York could be jailed for 15 to 20 years because of the New York Rockefeller Act that was implemented as a result of this policy. That was the way it handled drug users, the drug user part of the issue. Now, to handle the manufacturers, the sellers, the people who put this stuff on the street, it was brute force. So they'd create task forces and they'd put a lot of money into these task forces to combat the people who were making all the drugs. So like this policy has shown, it was a very punitive method. It focused on really just criminalizing drugs, like I said, and it focused on creating an image of drugs that was negative. If you used drugs, you were a criminal. They thought that creating this connection would help people stay off drugs because they wouldn't want to be associated with it because of its negative connections. Its main goal was to combat the drug rates, get drug users off the street, help addicts. But really, it didn't really focus on fighting addicts. It really just focused on getting drug users off the street, and then it focused on getting those manufacturers and creators out of the country, out of the market, out of this world, because he thought, let's handle the issue at its source. People who are making these drugs available. The war on drugs policy failed in its main goals to combat the drug use rates and take out the amount of drugs on the streets because of its punitive method, its inequality built into the policy, and its failure to combat the drug use rates. It's time to go back to Vinny and follow his story. So, Vinny right here is going to show next example why the punitive policy does not work. Vinny right here has been put into jail for using drugs as the policy requires. One, the amount of money that's going to be put into Vinny's life is going to be a ton. It's going to be a ton of money. That money instead could be put into places like rehabs, which help him deal with their drug use issue. Now, another thing is that since Vinny right here is in jail, excluded from society and everyone he knows, when he gets back out, it's going to be difficult to adjust back to the different pace that society is going. As just discussed, the punitive policy does not help the drug user deal with his drug use problems, so he leaves jail, excluded from society. There's not enough money in the proper places for him to go to deal with his problem, so he has one place to go back to use drugs again. And then he just becomes once again another one of the stats, one of the drug users' stats, part of the numbers, forgotten. The prejudice in the war on drugs policy caused it to fail. The reason this caused it to fail is because someone who was white could have been given a much less harsh punishment even if they had a more serious drug issue. This would have led them to keep on going using drugs, and their drug issue would be worse and worse. While someone of color who has a less serious drug issue could have been given a harsher punishment. And we have already talked about what being sent to jail can do to a person and how it can lead them back to drugs. So the drug policy was doing the opposite of what it was supposed to do. It was creating drug users instead of taking them away. The reason is it didn't take down the supply. It actually caused it to rise because there was more demand for it because of these different punishments given to different people. The war on drugs also failed because it failed in its main goal of lowering the drug use rates. The evidence is this is the jail population. Almost half of it are like Vinny right here, who got put in jail for using drugs. It shows that they failed to stop it because you would expect that number to go down over time. A lot of people who argue this policy argue that it's the best method available to handle the market as big as the drug market. So it may not be the perfect policy, but it does the best that it can, and it did have success in lowering the drug rates for a little bit of time. And while that is true, the effects of this policy were short-term, and it can be seen in the way that the drug rates have gone back up because it was very short-term. It didn't take away drug users. The supply for the market, the demand for the market just created more drug users through its faulty policy. If these reasons for the war on drugs policy failing are not realized, then more and more people like Vinny here are going to suffer as a result of the policy. And this policy just creates more drug users. And they begin the drug use cycle. And that only ends in one place: death.